Hello, Stormies. I hope it's not too windy outside, because it's time for a scary story. A few years ago, while I was still in school, I had what I can only describe as, a bad or terrifying experience. Let me start from the beginning. I lived in a pretty remote place in Wyoming. It was peaceful, having a wide open space like that to live in. No loud, obnoxious neighbors. Actually, almost no one at all. Anyway, one night, I was just watching the news, when, to my surprise, the story took place close to the town that was familiar to me, probably from one of the many trips to get groceries. My elation and excited feelings quickly died, leaving me gulping to try and exile the lump in my throat. On the TV was a police sketch of a man, his mouth twisted in a sick grin that was explained by a woman on the screen. Whenever this man was spotted, he always had the grin plastered to his already creepy face, enhancing the disturbing feeling growing inside of me. The story, as far as I remember, was that he was a serial killer that went around cornering people at night and then bashing them with a sledgehammer. I silently thanked God that they didn't show the victims, as they sometimes did on that particular channel. I, on edge and rattled, shut off the TV. The sound of my breathing filled the quietness of my home. I tried to get to my bed quickly. Every creak of the house just filled my mind with the sledgehammer killer. I didn't usually get scared watching that kind of stuff, but perhaps the proximity to myself got me. That, and the fact he was still out there, stalking his next victim. The next morning I woke, groggy, from the minuscule amount of sleep I had gotten. I barely had time to get to the bus, but I managed to. I wasn't focused on school, though, throughout the day, because my thoughts kept slipping back to him. I suddenly felt a tap on my shoulder, and I nearly launched out of my seat. My heart was beating at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The teacher glared at me, and the ruckus I had caused. As soon as he went back to rattling off useless mathematic questions, I whipped around to find my classmate, Jaiden. She was staring at me with wide eyes. She, like me, was one of the rejects of the school's pyramid-shaped society. I was constantly being bullied for being nerdy, whatever that meant. And she bullied for being ugly. She wasn't ugly. She was just skinny. Like, in a clothes hanging off and too skinny to be healthy kind of way. But not grotesque, like how the others portrayed her to be. She whispered in a quiet, almost sweet voice for a pencil and an eraser. I was happy to oblige, not just to take my mind off of the killer, but because she had always been nice to me. I drew a smiley face on the eraser and peeked back to see her reaction to the picture. Just then, the bell rang, and that was the end of the school day. Everyone funneled out, except for a few students, Jaiden included. I flinched, recognizing that it was the bully trio once again starting up on poor Jaiden, and I, being a coward, left her. I regret that choice to this very day, because maybe if I just would have I walked home as quickly as possible, eager to see my house, mom, dad, anything safe before the sun slid down the horizon. I shivered at the thought, but my terror was misled as I got back to my house and parents safely, and again had a bad night's sleep, waking at the slightest sound. The next day at school, Jaden didn't sit behind me in any of the classes. In fact, she was just gone. I wasn't sure what to make of it until after class, the leader of the bully trio whispered about Jaden getting murdered, and that she deserved it because of how gross she looked anyway. It took all my strength, but I resisted the urge to gouge her eyes out with my fingers, thinking it would teach her a lesson. I spent my walk home trying to get the image of a bloodied, crushed body belonging to Jaden out of my head. To my horror, her parents had filed a missing person case. The weeks went by, finding no evidence or a body. After months, the sledgehammer killer and Jaden's cases both went cold, with no new leads, not even the tiniest bit of DNA. It chilled me to my bones. And I'm sad to say, life went on, save for a new grave marked with her name, Jaden's name, the name of a kind girl I once knew. Then, that all changed the next morning. I remember it very clearly, as if I had just had it happen to me. It was a Monday. I didn't have school because I had finally graduated high school. They had found a body. She was left on the side of the road. Her jaw was broken. I'm not talking about a fracture or even a bone sticking out. The girl I recognized instantly had her entire jaw snapped off her face. It was just gone. It had been smashed, and it was with a sledgehammer. They showed the detailed picture and video as the girl was loaded onto a stretcher. I almost threw up at the sight of the bone of her top jaw visible. Strips of flesh still hung, threatening to fall into her throat, which was now an open black hole in her neck. I turned the TV off. She was the leader of the high school bullies. Well, had been. She was now a mutilated, jawless girl. I shuddered, and my mind went to the sledgehammer killer, who I hadn't thought about for a while. I couldn't get any sleep at all that night, and just sat in the bathroom with the light on. The next night I did the same, and that continued for a week, until both of the other bullies were found together, both with their jaws smashed. One half of one of their jawbones was found next to the bodies, but it was completely shattered and was unusable in any surgeries that they would try to help save the 3 victims' faces. I slunk under my bed covers and stayed there until I stopped shaking. I would have been humiliated if anyone saw me under any other circumstances, but I couldn't help but wonder if I would be next. I finally started calming down. My breath was evening out, and my heartbeat slowed. That's when I heard it. The heavy thuds against the door of my apartment. They were accompanied by a loud gurgle of a scream, not quite like screaming underwater, but like a gargle of some sort. The thuds were steady, and like a pulsating rhythm, fell into an even beat. The gargly wailing was erratic, one moment screechy, and the next almost like it was begging. Then it grew quiet, except the faint sound of breathing. It lasted for what seemed like half a minute. I crept out of the blankets and was considering looking through the peephole when something smashed the middle of the door, sending splinters of wood showering around. I screamed and leapt back. It was then I recognized a sledgehammer through the hole in the door. My back hit a wall as a leg started to poke through. The leg seemed to convulse erratically as it tried to force its way through. And I couldn't physically do anything. It felt like my spine was gripped by ice-cold claws holding me against the wall. I just stared with horror as it finally made its way inside. Its skeletal fingers gripped the sledge in a way that suggested it was way too heavy for the creature. Her white clothes were dirty and hung off of her far too slim, spindly figure. Her hair hung down her neck, almost reaching her shoulders, her bangs covering all of her forehead, but her eyes peered into me from black, inky sockets. And her face. Her bottom jaw was gone. No blood, because the injury was old and healed. Her teeth shone brightly in the now blinding light. Her uvula and throat clearly visible, and I don't know how, but I recognized her through her smile. I said her name, quietly, barely a whisper. Jaiden? She made another gurgling noise, and then began walking over to me, dragging the sledgehammer along, scraping on the wood flooring. I crawled to a corner, covering my head, and, most importantly, my jaw. I stayed there for 5 minutes, waiting, and just waiting for her to start smashing me and my jaw. Eventually, nothing happened, and I slowly peeked out, and she was gone. I looked around, but she was just gone. And then I saw it. I reached for it and brought it closer. It was a dirty, old eraser with a smile I had drawn onto it, which instantly sent shivers down my spine. However, on the other side was written 2 things. It said, "Thank you," and a scrawled picture, its graphite still visible. Another smiley face. I haven't quite recovered from that night. I can never look at anyone ever again. I hope they don't reveal their teeth to me in a grin or a smile or anything. I still just can't handle it. I slept, but only thinking if she would ever return. And the most important change to my life is the things I learned. I put this on here as a warning for everybody, anybody. The first warning is don't bully. Just don't. The second is if you happen to see a woman too skinny for her clothes, a woman who doesn't have a jaw, don't flinch, don't stare, don't point, but most importantly, do not call Jawless Jaiden ugly. You've been warned. Oh, and don't forget, for goodness sake, smile. She likes that. Like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to see more content. And don't forget, check out some of my other videos. 'Cause if you don't, Jawless Jaiden will come after you. Anyway, see you next time, Stormies.